In 1960, the third largest car company in America was not Chrysler. It was a company with 1/10 of Chrysler's resources, no styling department worth the name, and a president who had spent 6 years calling the products of his competitors gas-guzzling dinosaurs. The car that did it was compact, underpowered by Detroit standards, mocked in showrooms and dismissed in boardrooms. It had been on the market for years before anyone took it seriously. Its name was the Rambler. The man behind it was George Romney, and what he did to the American auto industry between 1954 and 1962 stands as one of the most precise acts of competitive destruction in the history of manufacturing. He did it without a new platform, without a design revolution, without a dollar of the capital his rivals spent without thinking. He did it by refusing to build what everyone else was building. The engine had to prove itself. For Romney, so did the car. In 1954, the American automobile was the American identity, longer every year, lower every year, more chrome, more fins, more engine displacement than any driver needed on any road that existed. General Motors alone had 5 divisions: Chevrolet, Pontiac, Oldsmobile, Buick, Cadillac, each one designed to pull a buyer upward through a lifetime of escalating purchase decisions. Ford had its own ladder. Chrysler had its own. The system was self-reinforcing and total. Nobody bought a small car in America because nobody was supposed to want one. The industry had decided this. The industry was not asking for opinions. Into this market, in 1954, 2 failing companies merged. Nash and Hudson Motor Car Company had each spent the post-war decade losing ground to the Big Three with a speed that suggested structural collapse rather than ordinary competition. Nash had the Rambler, a compact introduced in 1950 that sold in modest numbers to buyers the industry politely categorized as people who didn't know what they really wanted. Hudson had racing heritage, engineering pride, and no money. Together, they formed American Motors Corporation. The combined company had 32,000 employees, 1 functional compact car line, and debts that made every creditor in Detroit uncomfortable. George Romney became its president. He was 47 years old. He had spent 12 years as an automotive lobbyist before joining Nash. He had no engineering degree. He had no design background. He had, instead, a conviction he had been developing since the late 1940s, that the American auto industry was building the wrong cars, and that the moment a serious alternative appeared, the market would prove it. Romney did not wait to be proven right. He went looking for the proof himself. The Nash corporate offices, Detroit, Michigan, late 1954. George Romney sits at a conference table with a production cost breakdown for the full Nash line in front of him. The big Nash models, the Ambassador, the Statesman, are not losing money because they are badly made. They are losing money because they are competing on GM's terms in GM's segment with a fraction of GM's volume. Romney runs the margin numbers on the Rambler. They are different, not because the Rambler is cheap, because it is smaller, uses less material, requires less tooling, and sells to a buyer who has no loyalty to the Big Three in that segment, because the Big Three have shown no interest in that buyer. He closes the folder. The decision is already made. Romney's first act as president was to discontinue the full-size Nash and Hudson models, not reduce them, not reposition them, discontinue them. The Hudson name survived on badge-engineered Ramblers. The Nash name survived the same way. But the full-size cars that had defined both companies were gone. The entire production capacity of American Motors would concentrate on one platform: the Rambler. Detroit responded with the specific contempt reserved for people who do not understand how the game is played. The industry press categorized the decision as the retreat of a company too small to compete at the adult level. Romney categorized it as the only rational allocation of limited resources against a structural market gap His competitors were too large and too profitable to see. He was not asking for agreement. He was building inventory. Between 1954 and 1957, Romney refined the Rambler methodically, improved the build quality, tightened the fit and finish to close the gap with GM's entry-level offerings, expanded the dealer network in secondary markets where full-size car payments were genuinely beyond buyer reach. He did not chase the styling wars. He did not add fins. He did not lengthen the wheelbase to signal aspiration. He kept the car small and made it better. But the real weapon was not the car. It was the language Romney used to describe everyone else's. Gas-guzzling dinosaurs. Romney used that phrase publicly, repeatedly, and with the precision of a man who understood that a memorable insult is better advertising than a full-page spread in Life magazine. He testified before Congress about automotive fuel waste. He called out GM by implication in speeches that the automotive press covered because no company president talked about the industry that way. He was not performing outrage. He was building a category by positioning the Rambler not merely as a smaller car, but as the rational car, the honest car, the car for Americans who had noticed that their neighbors' Buicks cost more to fill than a week's groceries. Romney created a frame that the big three could not easily enter. To agree with him was to condemn their own products. To disagree was to defend cars that were, by measurable fact, using more fuel than the physics of transportation required. They chose silence. Romney treated the silence as confirmation. Then, in the fall of 1957, Sputnik crossed the sky. The connection between a Soviet satellite and American car sales is not obvious, but the psychological effect of Sputnik on American consumer culture was a sudden, sharp skepticism toward excess. The assumption that bigger was inherently better had been a post-war article of faith. A small metal ball orbiting Earth at 17,000 miles per hour, placed by engineers working in conditions of genuine material scarcity, produced a quiet national question. What exactly is all this size for? Romney had been asking that question for 3 years. The market began asking it alongside him. Rambler sales in 1958 increased by 79%. In 1959, they doubled again. The production floor at the American Motors plant, Kenosha, Wisconsin, 1959. The assembly line is running at a rate it was not engineered to sustain. Romney walks the floor with his plant manager, watching the sequence. The bottleneck is not labor. It is steel delivery. The supply contracts were written for a smaller production volume. Romney makes a note. He will renegotiate in the morning. He stops at a finished Rambler American coming off the line, runs his thumb along the door seal, checks the alignment of the hood. The fit is correct. He nods and keeps walking. He does not smile. There is nothing to celebrate yet. The Chrysler Corporation is still ahead of him. In 1960, the Rambler outsold Chrysler. American Motors Corporation, with its one platform and its 32,000 employees, and its refusal to build anything longer than a Chrysler Newport's trunk, moved more cars in the United States than the third largest automaker in the world. Third place in American auto sales, behind only Ford and General Motors. The industry did not have language for this because the industry had not prepared for this. Detroit had assumed that market share moved in one direction only, upward, toward the companies with the most capital, the most models, and the most advertising. Romney had moved it the other way, from the bottom of the market with one car, in 8 years. GM's response was the Corvair. Ford's response was the Falcon. Chrysler's response was the Valiant. All three were compact cars. All three were built by companies that had spent the previous decade insisting that compact cars were not what Americans wanted. Romney had forced the three largest manufacturers in the world to chase him into a segment he had defined, on terms he had established, with products built in 6 months that his had been refined over 6 years. George Romney stood at the precise peak of American motors in 1960 and did not appear to notice he was standing there. He was already looking past the sales figures toward the next problem, which was that AMC's success had created its own trap. Volume required capital. Capital required debt. Debt required the kind of growth projections that pushed a small company toward the exact product expansion Romney had spent 8 years arguing against. The pressure inside AMC to add a full-size model, to compete in the segment where GM and Ford made their real margins, was not coming from outside the company. It was coming from the boardroom. Romney held the line, but holding the line required being in the room. In 1962, George Romney resigned the presidency of American Motors Corporation to run for governor of Michigan. He won. He served 3 terms. He later ran for president of the United States and was considered, briefly, the frontrunner for the 1968 Republican nomination. His son, Mitt, would eventually claim that nomination 44 years later. None of that is the story. The story is what happened to the room Romney left. American Motors, without George Romney, was a company that remembered its sales numbers but forgot the argument behind them. The Rambler had not sold because it was small. It had sold because Romney had constructed, painstakingly, over 8 years of public argument and product refinement, a case that small was correct, that the compact car was not the economy choice or the poverty choice, but the rational choice, that the buyer of a Rambler was not settling. He was deciding. Without Romney, that argument had no one to make it. The executives who succeeded him understood market share. They understood the pressure from the board to expand the lineup, add displacement, reach for the segments where GM made its margins. They did not understand or did not believe, or could not hold against the institutional weight of Detroit consensus, the thing Romney had understood from the beginning, that AMC was not a small version of GM. It was the alternative to GM. The moment it tried to become a small version of GM, it became the worst version of something the buyer could get better elsewhere. The drift was not immediate, not dramatic. It moved the way institutional failure always moves, through decisions that each made local sense and whose aggregate cost was visible only in retrospect. In 1964, AMC introduced the Rambler American in an upmarket trim with options that pushed its price toward the lower range of the full-size competition. In 1966, the Rambler name itself was retired from the flagship model, replaced by simply American Motors. In 1968, AMC introduced the Javelin, a pony car designed to compete with the Mustang. In 1970, the AMC Rebel. In 1971, the Matador. Each new model was a step away from the platform that had humiliated Chrysler and forced GM to rebuild its product strategy. Each step made sense in isolation. None of them worked. The AMC Design Studio. Detroit, Michigan. 1975, a full-scale clay model of the AMC Pacer sits on the review platform under fluorescent light. The Pacer is unlike anything Detroit has produced. Wide-bodied, bubble-glassed, designed for a rotary engine that will not be available by the time the car reaches production. The designer, who has worked on the exterior for 14 months, runs his hand along the roofline. It is genuinely distinctive. It is also designed around a powertrain that does not exist, for a market segment that does not exist, by a company that has spent a decade looking for an identity it lost in 1962. The model looks correct under the studio lights. It will not look correct on the road. The Pacer arrived in 1975. It was innovative in its proportions and compromised in its execution. The rotary engine had been replaced at the last minute by an AMC straight six, which sat too wide for the platform and produced the kind of performance numbers that required generous interpretation. It was mocked. It sold moderately for 2 years and declined from there. The Gremlin had already arrived in 1970, a subcompact introduced on April Fool's Day, a fact the automotive press treated as intentional self-commentary. It competed in the segment Romney had vacated, against competitors that had spent the intervening decade refining their compact platforms. The Gremlin was not a bad car by AMC's standards. By the standards of a buyer who could now choose a Honda Civic or a VW Golf, it was not the alternative. It was the also-ran. By 1979, American Motors Corporation had a market share of less than 2%. The company that had held third place in American auto sales 19 years earlier was producing fewer cars per year than GM produced in a slow week. The final years produced one genuine success. The Jeep division, acquired in 1970, was profitable and growing. Four-wheel drive was becoming a mainstream product category. AMC owned the most recognizable name in it. But a profitable subsidiary cannot rescue an unprofitable parent indefinitely. In 1987, Chrysler Corporation acquired the remaining assets of American Motors. It kept the Jeep line. It retired the AMC brand. The company that had humiliated Chrysler in 1960 was absorbed by Chrysler in 1987. 27 years, beginning and end. George Romney lived until 1995. He was 88 years old. He did not return to the auto industry after 1962. He watched, from his years in government and after, as the company he had built spent 3 decades becoming the thing he had spent 8 years arguing against. He had proved the argument was correct. The sales numbers in 1960 were not theoretical. They were 450,000 units delivered to buyers who had chosen the rational car over the status car in the largest consumer market in the world. The argument did not survive his departure, not because it was wrong. It was correct when he made it, and it remained correct after he left. Honda and Toyota proved it correct through the 1970s and 1980s with a precision that reordered the entire American market. The argument failed at AMC because an argument requires someone to make it. A corporate strategy requires someone in the boardroom who understands every day why the strategy is the strategy and not merely the current plan. Romney had been that person. Nobody replaced him. American Motors Corporation today is a name on a discontinued badge and a chapter in automotive history courses. The Jeep Grand Cherokee drives on. The AMC Eagle is a collector's car. The Rambler is the answer to a trivia question most people cannot place. The man who built it is remembered, when he is remembered at all, as the father of a presidential candidate and a 3-term governor of Michigan. That accounting is incomplete. In 1954, with 32,000 employees and one functional product and debt that should have ended the company before it started, George Romney decided that the American auto industry was wrong about what Americans wanted. He spent 8 years proving it with the only evidence that survives any argument: units sold, market share, a competitor forced to change its product line. Chrysler did not outsell the Rambler in 1960. That is not a footnote. That is the whole argument concluded. The engine had to prove itself. In 8 years, Romney made it prove it against every company in Detroit. Then he left, and the proof died without the man who made it.